Good morning. I am Jessica Lovell, and welcome to a very special edition of the Morning Medical Update, because we are live here inside the World War I Museum and Memorial here in Kansas City, Missouri. And we are talking this morning about the fascinating connection between medicine and World War I. There is a new exhibition called Bespoke Bodies, and it explains how World War I really kick-started the field of prosthetics, from prosthetic legs and arms to even faces. And it also explores how far the field has advanced today compared to 100 years ago. And we are also joined by two men who know firsthand all about this topic. I want to introduce to you Billy Brimblecom Jr. He was diagnosed with cancer. He survived cancer, but then he lost his leg. So Billy, we're going to talk a little bit more about your story coming up here in just a moment. And next to you is your doctor and your friend. I see we have he's orthopedic oncologist, Dr. Howard Rosenthal. He specializes in sarcoma patients at the University of Kansas Cancer Center. Guys, so good to see you. I know you have a special connection. I can already feel it here this morning in the room. What's it like to be sitting here together?
I mean, this guy saved my life, so I always love getting to hang out with him on this side of that story. So yeah.
I bet. Dr. Rosenthal, what's it like to just sit with your patient?
Well, one of the benefits of being an oncologist, especially in orthopedics, is we get to know our patients very well and we follow them for life. So I've gotten to know Billy ever since he was a little amateur drummer to a professional worldwide music tour drummer, and throughout his life, including getting a family.
So you're a patient, he's your patient, but you're also a fan, a big fan of his, right?
Yes, I am.
You follow him.
He's very inspiring.
He is, and we're excited to learn a little bit more about him. But before we get to your story, Billy, we want to learn a little bit more about this exhibition. We said it was Bespoke Bodies, and we talked with Christopher Warren. He is the Vice President of Collections, and he is the lead curator here at the museum. So take a listen and a look.
Medicine had advanced enough by the beginning of World War I and throughout World War I. Some of these wounds from artillery, from machine guns, were survivable. There was a subset of individuals who needed these prosthetics, thousands upon thousands of individuals. In these two cases, you have prosthetics, prosthetics from the time period from World War I. These are incredibly rare that they still exist because they were utilitarian. They were used every day when these men came back from the conflict. So the fact that we have some of these items in our collection is incredibly valuable to us, because these are very difficult to come by and just don't exist that much anymore. One of the lessons learned during the war and after the war in the prosthetic industry was you could not mass produce these types of prosthetics back then. They tried doing that, but then of course the veterans of the war, the survivors, complained about the difficulty in use, how uncomfortable these prosthetics were. They weren't fit exactly to their type of amputation or wound. So the industry learned, continuing on today, that you might be able to produce these types of things to some extent, a large amount of them, but then they have to be fitted individually to the individual person. The purpose of these, of course, is to make them comfortable and make them ambulatory and make them able to reintegrate back into society and not have any limits like they had after World War I, whereas today there's very few, if any, limits.
And we want to remind everyone that Bespoke Bodies will be here at the National World War I Museum and Memorial until April 24th. So if you can, please come down and check it out. Billy, just how cool, to use a term, how cool is this museum? And just more importantly, how important is it to educate people on this topic?
Yeah, I'm lucky to be involved with this exhibition as a chairperson, which is basically just a cheerleader and tell people about it. So here we are talking about it. It's incredible that this exists and that it's in Kansas City for so long. You know, the disabled community is, in the time of equality for everyone, thankfully, the disabled community is still very much last in line. We get good parking. And that's about it. So this is really great to be able to shine this light on this crazy world of prosthetics.
Well, and kind of on that topic, a lot of people just naturally may associate the military with amputees, and that's actually a very small portion of the disabled community and people who need prosthetics. Just explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's so people ask me all the time, even the guy that let me in, I'm walking into a National War Memorial, so if I was a veteran, and so So 500 people lose a limb every day just in the United States, which seems like a thing I'm making up, but it's true. It's actually just over 500, just in this country. Since 9/11, so modern warfare, only 1,500 combat amputees. So since 2001, 1,500, but 500 every day. So it's a very, on the pie chart of causes for amputation, the military is less than 1%. So that's a good thing, but yeah, so it's a small percentage.
It's a good thing, but not a lot of people realize
Yeah,
that.
we shine a very bright light on the military for good reason in this country, so that's why I'm asked every day, like, thank you for your service, you know.
And how do you respond?
No one's ever ready for it. Everyone's always bummed out. The best was a guy came up to me as I came out of a coffee shop, just ready to shake my hand, and then he said, thank you for your service. I said, oh, it was cancer, and then he went, well, it's all hard, and then hugged me. So, yeah.
I know, but I think you know what he means, and he's
Yeah,
wishing
yeah.
you well. And quite frankly, you are of service to the
Sure.
amputee community, so we appreciate that.
Yeah.
Take us back to 2005. You learned you have cancer. How were you officially diagnosed? What were you told?
Yeah, I remember this very well. And stop me if I'm wrong. There's the test. Before we do a biopsy, he says, here are all of the things this could be, and what we'll do if it's this. If it's this, it could be this, then we'll do this. And then I remember he said, if it is a sarcoma, we have to remove the sarcoma and everything that it's touching. And I was like, okay. So, knowing it's a big, a big thing in there. And he said, the only reason you would lose your leg would be to save your life. So we did a biopsy. We thought it was something else for a minute, but then they run pathology. In 3 to 5 days, we'll get back to you. And then I remember you're like, we thought it was lymphoma. We wish it was lymphoma. It's actually this Ewing sarcoma.
So, Dr. Rosenthal, that must be, our patients usually know more about it than, or as much about it as our doctors do, and they're so great at explaining it. Tell us a little more about what Ewing sarcoma is and who it affects.
Right. So Ewing sarcoma is a group of cancers of the musculoskeletal system called sarcomas. Ewing sarcoma is extremely rare, on the order of about an incidence of 1.7 per million people. So the problem is you have to do a lot of education, because Billy's never going to meet another person with a Ewing sarcoma. The likelihood of that is very, very small. We've changed our definition of Ewing sarcoma now to where we call it a family of sarcomas, or the Ewing's family of sarcomas. So while typically it's a cancer that arises in the bone, there's also a soft tissue component, there's also a neurological type of Ewing sarcoma, and they are different, and we're looking at the genetics of Ewing sarcoma itself. Billy started in his bone, but then extended beyond the bone, compromising the nerves, the blood vessels, and even the other bone in his leg, which is why, unfortunately, we were not able to salvage the leg and had to do the amputation.
Billy, what kind of symptoms were you having before you were diagnosed?
My whole thing was really weird. So this was 2005. I was in a car accident in 1999 that was very bad. Like, I had to cut the top of my pickup truck off and use the jaws of life to get me out. It was really, really bad. And I had a compression fracture on 2 of my vertebrae, and glass in my hands and all sorts of terrible stuff. Fast forward to later that summer, that was in February, I started having this pain in my ankle in the middle of the night for 3 nights. Very bad, kept me awake. But then went away like for months and months and months. So I eventually went and saw the orthopedist that treated me after that accident. And he was like, did an x-ray. So 6 years passed, and basically over, in that last year before I finally met this guy, it just was happening more often. And so I was seeing an acupuncturist. Everybody thought it was nerve damage. So, and then finally, I went and got it scanned, and it was like, oh, there's something the size of a large apple in your ankle.
Wow.
It is a very difficult diagnosis to make, because even on an x-ray, a plain x-ray, many times you're not going to see anything. In addition to that, the cells, if you were to do a biopsy, you mentioned lymphoma, the cells are called small round blue cells. We define it based on what it looks like. Well, lymphoma, for example, or lymphoma, which is a cancer of the lymph nodes, but does occur in bone as well, can look very similar to Ewing sarcoma, although lymphoma is much better treated than Ewing sarcoma. But also infection of bone. And with this prior history of the trauma, we always think about infection. Infection also of bone is a small round blue cell tumor of sorts. So we hope for the best, but Once we do the entire workup, then we finally do get the diagnosis.
And in this case, ultimately, the best route was to take Billy's leg. Why and when does someone with Ewing sarcoma need that?
So when we look at patients with cancer of the musculoskeletal system, the goal is to eradicate that cancer completely, get rid of every last cell. And it's mostly a surgical disease, although we do use chemotherapy as an adjuvant, we use radiation as an adjuvant, but the surgery is the primary component. About 95% of the time, we are able to perform limb preservation surgery. In other words, retain the limb and still take out the cancer and then do the reconstruction. What we do, as Billy pointed out, have to preserve life over limb. And if I can't assure myself that I can't get this out completely with a functional leg being left behind, then that's when you do an amputation. And an amputation, we're going to be much better off getting rid of every last cell if we can't salvage the limb.
So Billy, you've told us, you've had quite an interesting story that came even before you were diagnosed with cancer, but now you're told that you're going to have to amputate your limb. What was that like emotionally for you?
Terrible, but I had this, I just had a feeling that I couldn't admit it until later, like actually years later, that I had a feeling that was going to happen. And it was also the one thing I feared, and feared it like death wasn't even on my radar. Very much on his radar, but not, I just was, I'm not going to die. I remember telling my mom after I was diagnosed, I'm not going to die. But that was the one thing I was afraid of, But I also didn't feel that I needed a second opinion. I would sit in the waiting room in his office and see people coming from all over the country to see him. People are like, oh, we're flying to so-and-so. His office is one of those places. So I just knew that I felt like, okay, I know this is supposed to happen, and I'm with the right guy.
Yeah, that's a really good feeling.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your prosthetic leg. Tell us about that a little bit, because this certainly isn't your first one.
Right.
Tell us the story.
Yeah, so this is called a C-leg, made by a company called Ottobock, which is one of the largest prosthetic manufacturers in the world. So yeah, my amputation's above the knee, about 3 inches above the knee here, right?
Yes.
And so this is a socket, which, so my residual limb is in here. This goes all the way up just to hold on the robot part. There's a microprocessor in here, a computer with a couple motors. So, I always say there's a lot of different prosthetic limb options because there's a lot of different body options. And this is the thing that is appropriate for my body. It allows me to, pretty much walk around, like normal. So it's an incredible device that I'm very lucky to have.
So tell us about this microprocessor. What's this computer doing inside? Maybe Dr. Rosenthal explain the science behind
Well,
it.
you can make popcorn. There's great Wi-Fi. No, basically, it functions more like a normal knee. So if you're to squat down, and your knees don't just buckle, it's like there's a natural resistance that comes in your knees.
From your muscles.
From your muscles, thank you. And so this does more of that. So I can go downstairs, leg over leg. I can go down inclines, where your knees naturally bend a little bit. I can squat, things like that.
One of the problems we've always had with above-knee amputees with their prosthetics is going up and down inclined planes. Okay, with the older style prostheses, I want to say the regular types of prostheses, that was very difficult, and patients would fall over. With the C-leg or the computerized leg, there's some feedback to it that the knee controls the amount of resistance so he doesn't fall over it. And he can tell if he's walking on sand, if he's walking on a hard ground level surface, a rocky surface, and it adjusts. The other thing is, and you may remember this, the initial prostheses were probably a lot heavier.
Yeah.
Okay? And even with all the mechanics, this thing is made of carbon fiber, so
Right.
it's extremely light.
Yeah.
The only difference is Billy has to plug his leg into the wall at night.
This is true.
Tell
Yes.
us, you charge it?
Yeah. I mean, a computer has to be charged. So yeah. It has like a 1.5-day battery, but I just plug in my phone, I plug in my leg.
Oh my
So-
gosh, I love that.
Yeah.
All in a day, all
Yeah,
in
yeah,
a day.
yeah.
Dr. Rosenthal, you walked in here this morning and just like looking around here, we're sitting amongst 100 years of advancements when it comes to prosthesis. What do you think of that, and where might we be 100 years from now? Where would you like to see us?
Right, so even now we're making huge advances in amputations, even though, as I just said, we don't do a lot of amputations for cancer purposes anymore, thank God. I mean, we're able to save most limbs. But when we do have to amputate the limb, we can do it in such a fashion now as to project what the outcome from a functional standpoint will be based on how we're going to do the amputation. So unlike, and we were talking about this before earlier, unlike a traumatic amputation, where we don't get to choose the level as well as with cancer, where we can prepare everything. Billy had several MRI scans before we ever did the amputation that I could use to prepare the level, how we're going to do it, and so forth. So for example, nowadays, it's standard of care for us, and we've been doing this. I was shocked actually to just find this out just last week, that we've been doing something called targeted muscle reinnervation for the past 5 years on all of our amputations. What that is one of the big problems with amputations is phantom limb pain. And that's because the nerves that are cut, the amputation, start to sprout new sprouts of nerves, but they don't have any place to go. And that is feedback to the brain, and that causes pain. With targeted muscle reinnervation, we could reroute those nerves into itself, essentially creating a short circuit so the nerve thinks that it's still functioning and we don't have phantom limb pain. We can also take part of those nerves and redirect them into other muscle and plant the muscle where we want it to have within the prosthesis, and this is the future of prosthetics, be able to have little electrodes or transmitters on the prosthesis that the patient just thinks about something and the prosthesis does its job. Now that's going to be mostly in upper extremity where the patient, and this is already technologically available now, can move their fingers just like the Terminator, which is a little scary.
It's fascinating,
We can
though.
do that now.
It really is. Billy, I want to talk about this incredible nonprofit that you head up called Steps of Faith Foundation. What's your mission?
Yeah, so Steps of Faith, we're a nonprofit 501c3. We're 10 years old as of this year. Started in Nashville, Tennessee originally at the prosthetic clinic where I was a patient. And we've been back in Kansas City for several years now. But yeah, what Steps of Faith does is we help get prosthetic limbs for amputees that have no health insurance, or as I say, terrible health insurance. So no prosthetic coverage. So a lot of people don't have health insurance. It's a rocky road, and then a lot of people have really terrible policies. Medicaid in a handful of states, Texas being one of them, for instance, does not cover prosthetic care for adults, which is ridiculous. So that's what
And
Steps of
these
Faith
are
does.
expensive.
They're all expensive. Even the most simple ones are very, very expensive.
Give us a price. What do they cost? And people have to buy more than one through a lifetime.
Yeah, sure. So the most basic, like below the knee, which is the most common, commonly needed prosthesis, that's going to be at least $5,000. This is what's going to build your insurance, or you're going to need to pay out of pocket. So everything medical is expensive, and so when it comes to these, they can be very expensive.
How much is the above knee sea leg?
So this is a $60,000 prosthesis. So.
Okay.
And I want to make a point here. This isn't Billy can drive a Honda, he chooses a Ferrari. No. That does not apply when it comes to this. Again, there's different kinds of these because there's different kinds of these,
Sure.
right? So, yeah. So what Steps of Faith does is we help people that are in this catch-22, and 75% of the time, this isn't always the narrative, but we're getting people then back to work and then back on some sort of health insurance policy, and then they become a paying patient to the prosthetists that we work with to help them.
Fantastic. And I can't imagine going through that and then having to, have so many challenges with your health insurance and not being able to pay for it.
Exactly.
It's
You've
incredible.
already had to deal with this
Yeah.
crazy nightmare and this huge change happening, and you just want to be able to just get back and get better and get doing what you were doing before. And then if you have to go through all this red tape, I had to have this huge fundraiser for me way back in the day anyway. So it's ridiculous that Steps of Faith needs to exist, but I'm thankful that we do.
Yeah. Great work you're doing. Okay, so let's talk about your fundraiser and some of your famous friends, like Ted Lasso. If you're in Kansas City, you of course know Jason Sudeikis. Ted Lasso is from here, and you're using that star power, Billy, for this fundraiser called Thunder Gong.
Yes.
Tell us about it, and I guess we're going to see a drum here also on this video, but tell us
Yeah.
about this fundraiser.
Yeah, so Thundergong is the thing. So Jason and I grew up together. We've known each other since we were teenagers, doing improv comedy together at a place called Comedy Sports here in Kansas City back in the day. And yeah, we started this Thundergong once my wife and I moved back to Kansas City. We did the first Thundergong in 2017, and it's basically like a rock and roll variety show. Jason hosts. My band is the house band, and there's all these actors and all these musicians, and everybody plays music together and has some laughs, and we raise a ton of money for Steps of Faith. And it's every second weekend in November every year. So November 11th this year at the Uptown Theater.
That's so fantastic. Great work. If you have any questions for Dr. Rosenthal or Billy, go ahead and send those in. We have information up on your screen. I'm going to send it back into the studio where Jill Chadwick is joining us. Jill, good morning.
Good morning. Will you ask Billy how they got the name Thundergong?
Yeah, Billy, how did you get the name Thundergong? Where did this come from?
So it's nonsense, but it's basically, I still have the note in my phone. I was trying to think of percussive party. So Jason had the idea, what if we call it skins for limbs? Like an old school term for the drums, is playing the skins. But that skins and limbs just sounds kind of gross and strange. And so I was like, good idea, but so I was trying to kind of think, it was almost Radamacue razzmatazz.
Okay.
You can look up Radamacue. It's a drumming rudiment. Razzmatazz is a party. It didn't roll off the tongue as well. So it was going to be Gongs of Thunder. And then Micah Smith, who is my friend who does all of our graphic design and branding, said, okay, let me work on Gongs for Thunder, making a logo. And he was like, it's actually Thundergong. And I was like disappointed. And then he showed me the logo and I was like,
That's it.
it's Thundergong.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's loud party. That's what it means.
All right, Jill, there you have it.
Thank you. We really love parties that have a great purpose. I am in the studio this morning. Happy Monday to
Hi.
Dr. Hawkinson,
Yeah.
Medical Director of Infection Prevention and Control. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, it's such a great
Cause.
a cause, and just looking and listening to even just the creation of the name and the logo. I mean, that is just a small tidbit of everything you get from the creativeness of that show. So
Yeah, it's
very
great.
good cause, and it all goes for what we've heard, just helping people, and that's what we want to do for sure. I would say we're going to segue a little bit though into the COVID numbers, but that is better as well. So today we still have lower numbers of active infections, 10 total, but only 4 active infections, 1 in the ICU and 1 on the ventilator as well.
All right, I have 2 quick questions for you. One of them is, we have word this morning of another drug shortage making the headlines. It's a medicine to treat infections, including syphilis in Kansas, and I've heard you talk about syphilis is pretty prevalent in Kansas right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's really prevalent all over the United States. We are seeing the numbers of syphilis cases increase all over the United States. It is increasing locally as well. I know that in my practice with infectious disease and my colleagues and infectious disease colleagues around the city, especially in our MSM or HIV population, we just have large numbers. So this drug that we are talking about, this penicillin formulation, penicillin LA, is the gold standard for treating syphilis. We are aware of this at the health system, and luckily with the health system, our pharmacists and our supply chain people are always aware of these things. They keep their feelers out just to make sure and understand about drug shortages in general. And for this one, we have known about it. We have put in place alternative therapies for certain populations with syphilis. So we are ready to do that here at the health system, but whenever we can, obviously the gold standard. And still for most of our patients, we are probably going to be able to use that bicillin, but just in general in the country, there is a shortage of that drug.
Right, so the watchword is take
Yeah,
precaution,
take
be
precautions.
preventative, don't get syphilis, which is the same for the next question that I
Yeah.
have. We want to take preventative measures because we're in tick season, and we don't want to get bit by a tick and then get sick from it. But I wanted to ask you about how rare is Heartland virus disease?
Yeah.
Earlier this summer, a person in Crawford County, Kansas got it in southeast Kansas, but it's only the 3rd person ever, so is it rare?
Yeah, it is pretty rare. I mean, we are learning about other diseases. Certainly the biggest tick-borne disease that people know about and we always hear about is Lyme disease. And while we do have the ticks here in our area that do carry Lyme, we don't see it as much as, say, other areas like the Northeast or places like Minnesota and Wisconsin will see Lyme disease. We have other bacterial and viral diseases here, most notably Ehrlichia and Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Our practice has seen several cases of those this year already. And then again, these viruses such as Heartland virus, which was helped to be discovered by a colleague of mine, Dr. Scott Folk, up in St. Joe a few years ago. And we also had a virus that was helped identified here at the health system, and that was Bourbon virus as well. But these viruses do seem to be rare. Much more rare than the bacterial causes. But we still want to promote prevention of tick bites and understanding that. And the best thing that you can do if you're going to be out in those areas where ticks may be, brush, camping, even out fishing with high weeds and high grass, it's always important to wear long clothes, especially light clothes that you can see the ticks, and especially important to wear that insect repellent as well.
Yeah, I've heard from people that ticks are really bad this year.
Yeah,
And-
and I think some of that, again, I think we can go back to climate change on some of this. You haven't had the hard freezes, you've had those more milder temperatures where the tick population can stay high because of that, but also the other animals that they feed on, those populations are staying high
Yeah,
as well.
we have a colleague, Cliff Irwin, who's at Boy Scout camp this week with
Yeah.
his kids, and we told him, make sure you keep those ticks off you
That's right.
this year. Yeah. Are there any reporter questions today? There are not. So Jess, we're going to send it back to you.
All right, Jill Hawk, thank you so much. Let's get to some community questions this morning. And Yen Liang has one for Dr. Rosenthal. Can chemotherapy or targeted therapy be used to treat malignant sarcoma? And what are their effects?
So the answer is yes, absolutely. In fact, all of our sarcomas we present at our weekly sarcoma tumor board, which is attended by myself as surgeons, my partner who is an orthopedic oncologist. We have general surgical oncologists, medical oncologists, radiation oncologists, the whole group. So there's a group of over 30 people involved in the treatment of every patient that we treat. Part of that treatment, the primary treatment, as I said, is surgical, but we do use both chemotherapy, targeted molecular therapy, immunotherapy, and a whole slew of other types of medical management, as well as radiation.
Fran wants to know, Billy, how long did it take you to learn to walk on your leg?
The first time or the second time?
Both.
About a year. the first time.
Yeah, similar
baby.
timeline. I got my first prosthesis. It was to think out loud here. It was in the middle of October of 2005, and I was done using a cane by Christmas. So, actually, it felt like a long time at the time, but having worked with so many amputees with Steps of Faith, it was very fast. But I was young and had a great surgery and a great, prosthetist who fit me with a wonderful prosthesis. So I had all of the things going for me that I could have.
Right. So on that note, this is my personal connection. My father-in-law was diagnosed with sarcoma when he was 25, lost his leg when he was 26, all the way up, all the way up here. He's 80 now. Do you find this to be the case with people? My father-in-law has been he has had the same wooden leg for decades. He's almost afraid of the new technology because I think he's so attached and so secure with this leg that he's clearly outgrown. What do you say to people, though, do you find people like that who, it's hard to move up and move with the technology, especially somebody who's much older, and they could live a much better quality of life, but
All the time.
Getting them there is tough.
That happens all the time. We will see people. We help this woman, I could say her name, she's done a lot of press for us, Grace here in Kansas City, who she was an adult, but she had just aged out of her parents' insurance at 26 or something like that, and had the same prosthesis for 10 years or whatever. And I saw this thing and I was like, that's crazy. I mean, it was literally duct taped together. People, you name it, people, it's hey, there's a better way, So yeah, I mean that's what I would say to people. It's like on one hand, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You're comfortable. If he's fine, he's fine. But like, you know, things are getting better all the
Yeah.
time, especially if, you know, hopefully you have a health insurance plan that can cover it.
Yeah, embracing the science, not always easy. I always said his
Yeah.
leg could probably be in this museum right now, but it's true. It's
If it's
true.
wooden,
It's
that's
true.
a relic.
No joke.
I like to say that when I tell patients that have an amputation, your good friend is going to be your doctor.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
But your best friend has to be your prosthetist.
Absolutely.
Because your prosthetist is going to follow you also
Mm-hmm.
for life, replacing broken parts or revising.
Right. Well, that was one of the questions that Terry has. What happens when your body changes through the years? You lose weight, you gain weight. How does that work? Can you adjust, or do you have to go to another leg?
It depends,
Okay.
you know. But so like for me, this socket, you know, I mean, it is fit to my residual limb and held on by suction. So a lot of people will wear a thing called a liner over their residual limb, which is like a thick gel sock. So I've never worn one of those. My first prosthetist never fit me with one, so it's skin fit suction. So it's a very intimate fit. So if I gain or lose weight, I notice. So yeah, you know, I always say when you get a new car, you hopefully don't need to go to the mechanic for a while, but eventually you need to go, you know, even just for maintenance. So yes, your prosthetist needs to be your best friend. And yeah, over time things wear out and you do need to update.
Tune it up.
Tune it up.
Tune it up,
yeah.
just like anything. And I think I know the answer to this question because I learned that you actually charge your leg at night. But Leslie wants to know if you swim or shower with it. Are you allowed to get it wet in any way?
So this is very water resistant, this leg, but no, that's really the only time it's off. You know, mine is I'm comfortable in it. It's much easier to move around when it's on, so it's off if I'm sleeping or in water. Yeah, but they make water legs and shower legs and that kind of thing, but it's like easier if I just take it off and do it.
Do your thing.
Plus, he's got to clean his leg.
Yeah, exactly.
Also that.
You got to get
Yes.
into all those little crevices and
Yes.
areas.
Yes.
Clean it all. I want to get our takeaways today. Dr. Rosenthal, I'll start with you. What do you want people to take away from this conversation and the fact that this exhibit is here in town?
Well, I think Billy touched on it also, is cancer is a devastating diagnosis. Sarcoma, I would say even worse because of the rarity. There aren't any good support groups. You're never going to see a commercial on television about it. So you're sort of left by yourself. And there has to be a lot of education from the medical community. But we're talking about not only saving life, but saving limb. And if we can't save limb, get the patient to where they can be functionally a member of community, a contributing member of community, and somebody who can inspire others. I think that's the goal.
Absolutely. Getting your patients back out there again.
Yes.
Billy, what's the takeaway today?
I mean, get a good doctor. Yeah, I mean, I'm just very, very lucky. Like I said, I had a lot of good things going for me, considering something so terrible happened to me. Yeah, so my takeaway would just be like,
Ask him who visited him in his hospital room
Okay.
immediately right after his amputation.
All right, who was it?
so the very quick story would be, he was going to come because he was in town, but he called me 2 days in a row. So it was Rick Allen, the drummer for Def Leppard, who lost an arm. Yeah. And so he's like, he learned there was this other amputee drummer, and so he called me 2 days. And the first day he called me, I was right out of surgery. I had just been taken back to my room, and I was like, hey! And I had heard that he might call, and so I was super out of it. He's like, all right, mate, I'll call you tomorrow when you're not so sedated. And I didn't want to get off the phone. I was like, that guy ain't calling me again. And sure enough, I was telling my nurse the story the next day, and the phone rang, and they were like, and so yeah, Rick, we've communicated since then we have a lot of mutual friends. And I even had a long conversation with his wife on the phone a couple years ago, but he and I have not spoken since then. But yeah, it was that guy was like a hero to me when I started
Yeah.
playing drums when I was a little kid, and it's still a hero to me. So there were a lot of really bright spots in a really horrible time for me, and that was one of them.
That would, he's a total legend.
Yeah, I mean,
Drumming, yes,
unbelievable.
but for what he's done for
Yeah.
the amputee community has just been incredible.
Yeah, he's a real sweetheart.
So thank you both for being here with us today. Billy, sharing your story, and Dr. Rosenthal, always sharing your insight. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of our viewers, and we will see you back here Wednesday at 8. coming up Wednesday on Open Mics with Dr. Stites. Life-saving gifts sometimes leave a troubling mark, from rashes to lesions to infections. Organ and bone marrow donations can lead to skin disorders. I'm Jessica Lovell on the next Open Mics with Dr. Stites. Dermatologists delve into post-transplant skin problems, why they happen and how they're treated. Wednesday at 8.
Subscribe to our Morning Medical Update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcast. Now everywhere podcasts are available.